the emotion of sex. And why is this emotion not explained to us through our education system when we are young, when we are in high school, when we are getting ready to get into the world, when we are getting ready to get launched into the outside world? Why is the emotion of sex not a part of our education system? And when I say the word sex, it immediately can ring a bell in, our minds as to something just strictly perverted, just the act of sex itself and, what that entails. But I'm going to start this video off by reading a quote from a very interesting book that I've recently read from Napoleon Hill. The book is called Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. So let me read this quote. The person who has great discipline understands the emotion of sex, respects it, learns to control and transmute it into constructive activities. So let me read that again. The person who has great discipline understands the emotion of sex, respects it, and learns to control and transmute it into constructive activities. That is a quote from Napoleon Hill, Outwitting the Devil. So this quote, when you slow down and really think about what he's saying here, the person who has great discipline, right? So somebody who has great discipline, great discipline entails somebody who is able to control his or her actions willingly, right? At will. They're not, taken by whatever comes at them or whatever emotion or circumstance comes at them. So they have discipline to stick to a plan no matter what comes up, right? So this kind of person who has great discipline understands the emotion of sex, not sex itself, the emotion of sex and what the emotions that sex brings onto you as a human being. The same way everything else brings an emotion onto you, fighting, laughing, right? Making jokes, learning, all of these things bring emotions to us as human beings. So it says, the person who has great discipline understands the emotion of sex, respects it, right? So he says, the person who has great discipline understands the emotion of sex, respects it. Why would Napoleon Hill be saying to respect an emotion like that sex can bring onto you? Why would we have to respect an emotion like sex? Because in my mind, if he is saying something like respecting an emotion, that tells me that, like anything else that you have to respect, it's not something that should be taken lightly or should be played around with, right? So based off of this quote, there's so many things being told to us already. The person who has great discipline understands the emotion of sex, respects it, and learns to control and transmute it into constructive activities. So from a reader's perspective, when I hear this quote, it makes me laugh, especially being a young guy, because it makes so much sense. The emotion that sex can bring onto us, it is a very sacred and potent emotion. So I understand why he's saying that emotion of sex, we must respect it, which means to not treat that emotion like if it were just, something cheap and not so potent, just if it was light, right? So you treat it with respect, and then you learn to control it and transmute it into constructive activities, where it gets really interesting, right? So not only are we supposed to respect and control this emotion, this desire for sex, but there's also benefits to the emotion of sex. Transmuting it into constructive, well, first of all, learning to control it and then transmuting it, right? Because if you can control something, then you can choose where you'd like to delegate that emotion to and where you'd like to transmute it to, right? So once you learn how to control it, then you can transmute it into constructive activities. So very, very, very interesting quote here. because it's telling us as human beings that we have the power to control the emotion of sex and then transmute it to our benefit. So transmute it to our benefit. We are able to use that emotion of sex to achieve something that we are hoping to achieve. And how do we do this? Why would Napoleon Hill be saying that the emotion of sex be something that can be controlled and then transmuted into constructive activities, right? Because constructive activities for us human beings are very important, because we all have careers, passions, jobs that we go about our day-to-day life trying to get better in, improving, or trying to acquire, right? So now we can use this emotion of sex in order to help us with these activities that we have on a day-to-day basis. Why would something so important to us as human beings not be taught to us since we were young? It really makes you question the purpose of the education system. Are they in place to teach us how to think and operate as human beings on our own in the best way possible, how to become the best versions of human beings possible? Or are we being taught in reality to specialize in one thing and learn a lot of different things that make us a complete one specialized, person? So if we're looking to be a teacher, we learn about a whole lot of different irrelevant subjects, and then we specialize in one subject at the end of it. Teacher or psychologist, or whatever it is, it boxes you in. But why are we not being taught to become our greatest human being versions of ourselves? Because an emotion like sex, based off of what I've just read from Napoleon Hill's book, now you can either disagree with what he said or agree with it. I think even if you disagree or agree, what the man is saying makes you think. Because in an emotion like sex, we're taught in school, what we learn about sex is just the physical things, the things that are kind of in your face, right? That you'll eventually end up learning. Still important, of course, but why would an emotion like sex not be taught to us? Especially when we have so many young people being exposed to online stuff, being exposed to just more graphic things more earlier on. Why would an emotion like sex not be taught to us in school? And, why would we not be educated on how to properly handle this emotion that sex can bring upon us? So I'll read a couple more lines after this quote from Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil book. The greatest damage is that it depletes the source of man's greatest driving force and wastes without adequate compensation man's creative energy. It dissipates energy needed by nature to maintain physical health. Sex is nature's most useful therapeutic force. It depletes the magnetic energy, which is the source of an attractive, pleasing personality. So we can clearly see that if misused, this emotion of sex can cause us to be pretty much a way less version of ourselves than we could be if we were accurately and more responsibly using this emotion, right? So the greatest damage is that it depletes source of man's greatest driving force and wastes without adequate compensation man's creative energy, which would mean that if you're living your life misusing this emotion of sex, life would be a lot harder, just based off of these quotes from Napoleon Hill's book. It depletes the source of man's greatest driving force and wastes without adequate compensation man's creative energy. So say you're trying to succeed in a job that's very difficult. Say you're trying to start a new business. Say you're trying to endeavor into a new career. Say you're trying to become a doctor, a lawyer. If you're misusing the emotion and energy of sex, which is the source of man's greatest driving force, and waste without adequate compensation man's creative energy, you'd be living life a couple steps behind just by simply not understanding that energy that you're giving out, right, with the action of sex, without thinking about it, is something that is putting you on the back foot. That's putting you against a much harder world, because you're not presenting to the world your best self. Because, like it says here, source of man's greatest driving force, and then it's a source of our greatest creative energy. It dissipates energy needed by nature to maintain physical health. What else does it say here? It removes the sparkle from one's eyes and sets up discord in the tones of one's voices. It destroys enthusiasm, subdues ambition, and leads inevitably to the habit of drifting on all subjects. So just very interesting stuff here from Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil book. I just thought I'd throw on the camera and kind of share my thoughts with you guys. Man, as a young man especially, I know I'm going out into the world, you know, when you start picking up new experiences, and then you run into a book like this which explains this, and you say, wow, you know, because the school system is set up in a way where it's very limited to just teaching you as a human being something that will, or a lot of things that will pretty much just give you information that is of no use to you in actual real life. So when you read something like this in an author like Napoleon Hill's book, it kind of, you know, opens your eyes to a new aspect of life where you're like, oh wow, you know, you can learn about these things. Like, oh, I didn't even know that, you know, when I'm out here taking part of those kind of things, that I'm giving out this kind of energy, and that I could be better, making better use of my energy doing that same thing but another way, and making use of that energy rather than just unknowingly wasting it. So without, you know, nothing else to be said here, that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Please subscribe, like, comment. Eddie out.